The first Magicka was a title that I wasn't even really aware of until a few months after its release, and once I finally got my hands on it, well, I couldn't play it. It was an unoptimized mess that couldn't even run properly on my system that could easily chug through Crysis 2. Once I spent $200 upgrading my computer though, I was finally able to play with a friend of mine, and it was a great experience. It was charming and quirky while still being challenging and engaging, but the thing that really drew me in was the spellcrafting mechanic. It was a really interesting approach to the idea, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So once I saw that there was going to be a second one, I was excited but also cautiously optimistic for a few reasons. This time around, the game was being developed by Pieces Interactive, the team that made the DLC for the first Magicka, and switching developers mid-franchise isn't typically a good idea. Paradox has also been kind of doing whatever they want with the IP, and after the first game effectively boosted their profits by 250% in 2012, I don't blame them. They made a Magicka mobile game and even a MOBA that I'd love to show you footage of, but nobody plays it anymore. So with these issues in mind, I went into Magicka 2 not expecting much, and I was right in doing so.
Ah, a visitor. Stay a while. Stay forever. I mean, stay as long as you wish.
Magicka 2 feels like something that didn't need to be made, but was made out of pure desire to milk an IP. The whole thing felt like it was trying to sell me on something that wasn't itself. One of the first things you see after signing into Paradox's arbitrary second layer of DRM is a banner advertising Magicka Wizard Wars. Throughout the campaign, you encounter veterans of the so-called Wizard Wars, a battle between powerful wizards, not unlike the MOBA. I couldn't get through the whole thing without shaking this feeling that Paradox really wanted me to play their dead online multiplayer game. In fact, multiplayer is probably one of the easiest ways to explain Magicka 2's design. The Magicka series is known for its wonderfully designed multiplayer aspects, but this one really tried to push that home. Right from the get-go, there's this really strong sense that I'm supposed to be playing this with other people. When you start up the game, you're greeted with the Join Game screen, where you have to wait to find people to play with, rather than the Create Game screen, where you can play single player. If you choose to create a game, it defaults to not being private, so other people can join while playing. There are even some collectibles that you can't get without having multiple players. While this focus on multiplayer only really gets in the way for people that aren't interested in playing with others, it more seriously squanders the game's ability to tell a story. This time around, you play as one of the last wizards in Midgard, a land full of magical creatures and grand adventure. The resident narrator of the series, Vlad, is here once again to guide us on our quest to protect the Special Child from a group of shadowy evildoers that plan to use the Special Child's power to destroy all of Midgard. The multiplayer aspects of the experience make this story really disconnected throughout. Each level is designed as a short campaign that you can play through with other people, so plot points and story elements don't really carry over from level to level. The story also feels far too serious for its own good. While the first Magicka didn't really take itself very seriously, this one seems to take itself almost too seriously, which is strange given the amount of memes and references tossed throughout. There's references to Game of Thrones, Skyrim, The Hunger Games, Doge, and even this little bit where they reference Papers, Please, which was actually kind of funny. The joking nature of these smaller set pieces and sequences feels really disjointed from the serious nature of the main story. You can find books documenting the peril that certain characters are in, and then 5 minutes later run into a bunch of characters speaking broken Japanese. There's even this bit near the end where the game tries to make a quip about ludonarrative dissonance.
That's not funny!
A lot of the jokes, for lack of a better term, are punchlines without build-up. That ludonarrative dissonance joke had no real build-up, it just sort of shows up out of the blue, and while the Papers, Please one was actually funny, it still just came completely out of left field. Nothing built up any of the jokes, there was no underlying theme for them, they were just random pop culture references tossed in to fill the gaps between the serious story. While there were definitely a lot of things that were fumbled throughout, the developers did a solid job improving some of the more lackluster aspects of the first Magicka. The graphical fidelity is much greater, colors contrast better, making it easier to distinguish which elements are being used by which enemies. The environments are really a treat to look at, the low poly map in the main menu looks fantastic, and the newly added depth of field really makes the environments come to life. The audio is also much clearer. The music throughout is solid and impactful, and the sound of fire crackling and water flowing creates a much stronger sense of immersion. But the one thing they should have improved on is the one thing they barely changed, and almost made worse. The spellcrafting. The biggest selling point for the Magicka series is the ability it gives you to combine different elements to create spells. You can combine fire and earth to create an exploding fireball, You can combine water and cold to make icicles shoot up from the ground, and you can even use specific combinations of elements in order to create a powerful spell. The first game nailed this system. Everything about it was quick and complex, while also being simple enough for the player to get accustomed to making spells on the fly. With this iteration, they actually made it worse and removed some functionality. While the new addition of a hotbar to streamline spellcasting is useful, it certainly undermines the challenge of memorizing the element combinations. It's almost as if they didn't have faith in the player to remember a 5-button combo. They also removed the ability to combine water and fire to make steam, but still have the functionality of it creating steam. This might seem like a nitpick, but this change makes it so you can't do some of the combos you could do in the first Magicka, such as combining steam and lightning, which you can no longer do since water and lightning canceled each other out. This lack of feature improvements seemingly stems from the shift in developers. With Magicka 2, Paradox were very focused on making sure there was parity between the PlayStation 4 and PC releases of the title, as stated in an interview with Gaming Bolt. This resulted in the PC version being more of a port of the PlayStation 4 version, made evident by the lack of key rebinding on release, which most likely means they had to remake the engine and major parts of the game, like the spellcrafting mechanic, from scratch. This focus on the console release of the title meant there was more of a focus on rebalancing and streamlining for the PlayStation 4 version, which caused a lot of issues on release for PC. The review scores on Steam are still trying to recover from the consumer backlash, and rightfully so. In the current atmosphere of the games industry, where companies like Warner Brothers have to remove a broken game from sale to stop from getting more negative press, releasing a small, niche title on PC that is lacking basic features can only result in this sort of retaliation, which is more than deserved. I think the easiest way to describe Magicka 2 would be average. Compared to the first title, it's nothing special by any means. The only significant improvement is the ease of access for people interested in playing with their friends, and some graphical improvements. Outside of that, the story is more disjointed, the jokes miss a lot more than they hit, the focus on multiplayer is pointless once the player base is depleted, and ultimately the experience overall is a watered down version of its predecessor. It really does feel like an attempt at making money from a franchise, and it's a great example of what happens when you switch developers and engines in the middle of a series. With the complete lack of continued marketing support for Wizard Wars, the lackluster state that Magicka 2 released in, and the poor optimization of the first title, the Magicka franchise as a whole is starting to look like the textbook definition of wasted potential.